Hi there, it's JP Bloch, and I have for you today a video version of my latest blog. It has been edited down, but for those of you who don't like to read or maybe cannot read or you just like videos, I will give you a short version of my blog. And this is called One Nation ? There's been a lot of controversy over our Pledge of Allegiance containing the phrase, "under God." Some disfavor this phrase because they think it blurs separation of church and state, that the pledge creates a false impression that we are officially a Judeo-Christian nation. Others favor the phrase for pretty much the same reason. Personally, I don't care one way or the other if the phrase "under God" remains. I tend to be an informal person who takes any sort of ritual with a grain of salt. For many years, I began each school day reciting this pledge while my mind wandered, as it has a way of doing when confronted with repetition. I certainly don't remember any teacher explaining what the words of the Pledge of Allegiance meant, or why it started our day, let alone that the pledge itself had a history. Okay, no cheating here. But do you know the name of the pledge's original author? Da 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 da. Okay, time's up. And that answer is Francis Bellamy. And Mr. Bellamy wrote this pledge in 1892 primarily for public school children. The so-called Bellamy salute looked like Adolf Hitler's Third Reich salute, so it was replaced over time by the placing of one's right hand over one's heart. What we currently call our Pledge of Allegiance is in its fifth incarnation. It was not adopted by Congress until 1942, at the time of World War II, and "under God" was added in 1954. This was a time of Cold War fear of communism, which was viewed as not only atheistic, but dictatorially so. Though not surprisingly, other people saw this reasoning as right-wing extremism. It was not until later that I learned that our Constitution barely got a majority vote of ratification, and many hair-splitting compromises had to be made that complicated the straightforward document first presented by James Madison. This document replaced the earlier Articles of Confederation, which was in place from 1777 to 1788. There were people, which is to say property-owning white men, who agreed we should no longer be a British colony, but they wanted to keep each state autonomous. Even after finally becoming the United States of America, there continued to be uprisings to make a given state self-governing. The issue of states' rights versus one republic, of course, did not go away and was central to the Civil War that began only 72 years after our Constitution's ratification. States' rights versus federal policy continues to inform our debates to this day. So, back to the Pledge of Allegiance. What interests me more than the phrase "under God" is the one that immediately precedes it, "one nation." I find it ironic, if that would be the word, that no sooner do we declare ourselves one nation than do we start to fall apart. I wonder how many people think to themselves, "one nation under God, got that, you commie liberals?" Or its counterpoint, "one nation under God," which really shouldn't be part of the pledge I am making because it is fanatical or undemocratic. A pledge intended to bring us together becomes another symbolic tool for hating each other's guts. We take our disunity for granted, and perhaps we even embroil ourselves in it. But if we all took a giant step back and looked at our nation objectively, how do the people of one nation have such intensely differing views on, say, Barack Obama? Why is it that millions of people think Trump would be the best thing to happen to the U.S., while just as many, if not more, think he would be the worst thing that would happen? In either case, do the opposite thinkers truly live in the same nation? When I was a kid, a lot of old movies were shown on TV, and films made during and shortly after World War II told the story of mostly men fighting a just war. Hitler really did have to be stopped. Back at home, families lived on rationed food and planted victory gardens. Women built war machines, and everyone stuck together, knowing that their sacrifices paled to the ones being made by the Allied troops. Everyone shared a noble cause. Years later, I would realize that these united movie families had a way of being white and non-Jewish, and the U.S. military was not desegregated until after World War II. I learned of the internment camps for Japanese Americans and that not everyone supported the war effort. I also learned that war was horrible, and in real life there was no stirringly patriotic music in the background as soldiers sacrificed life or limb. PTSD has long been overdue in becoming part of our everyday vocabulary. Yet if I became less naive with age, some childlike part of my nature still wanted to know what it felt like to, at least more or less, be part of one unified nation. In the wake of 9/11, there were about 15 minutes or so in which I felt that sense of unity that I admired in old movies. But did thousands of people have to die for us to feel some sense of togetherness? And soon enough, we'd be splintering again on the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, Guantanamo Bay, and so on. In God We Trust became our official motto in 1956. Our older, unofficial model was E pluribus unum, which means out of many, one. I have nothing against trusting in God, but it is interesting that the older motto acknowledged difference among us, while the official one does not. Donald Trump's campaign slogan is Make America Great Again, but I wonder what time period should be provided as a point of comparison, because it was only ever a great country for some people. And this nostalgia for something that never was is not limited to conservatives. I have read many a liberal account that tells of another galaxy far, far away in which there was a more pervasive liberal norm. But again, this was true for some people more than others. In the perfect TV family 1950s, segregation was still legal. In the supposedly enlightened 1960s, help wanted ads were still segregated by gender, and anything considered sodomy was a punishable offense. Civil rights workers were jailed and even murdered. The war in Vietnam yielded a cohort of people who, after serving their country, became a demographic with an unusually high rate of suicide and homelessness. Yeah, the good old days. Some sociologists argue that conflict is the only road to positive social change. From this perspective, one could argue that there have been many positive results considering how divided our nation has always been. But I worry that we have painted ourselves into a corner.